Hello, this is Major Art Penhale. Welcome to Coffee Time with Jesus.
Greetings. We are so glad that you have decided to join us today. For the month of September, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at the calling that God has placed on the lives of the officers here in the KT division. Now, as you watch these videos, I hope that you're encouraged. I hope that if you have a calling in your life, that it will confirm that calling and that you will be so moved to do what it is that God desires for you. Blessings to you, my friends.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. Thank you for joining Ann and I in this coffee time. We have the privilege of sharing with you our calling. The whole month of September, the KT division is doing what we call Calling Connections, and it's our opportunity this morning to share just a little bit about how God called us into the Salvation Army. We have very unique backgrounds and callings, and we thought it would be great for you to hear how God spoke to us. Now, personally, Ann, I have kind of what I call an Acts 9 calling. I, of course, grew up in the Salvation Army. My parents were soldiers of the Corps in West Palm Beach. We attended all of the activities of the Corps, and for a long time, I didn't think there were other churches. I only knew about the Salvation Army. We had meetings all the time, and in our family, rather large family, we went to the Salvation Army on Monday night for youth activities, on Tuesday nights for band, on Wednesday night was prayer meeting and Bible studies and men's clubs and home leagues, and if the Corps was open, we went there. So I grew up going to the Salvation Army as a young person. But I can remember probably into my late teens that I really started to feel a sense that God had a greater purpose for my life, and I just wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And then I can remember attending a commissioning event in 1979, back in the dark ages, where the cadets were putting on a musical that night called Spirit, and the musical was done very, very well. And I can remember identifying with a character in that presentation, and that character's name was Ananias. And I couldn't help but feel a lot like Ananias in chapter 9 of Acts, where Ananias is just really following the Lord's command. In fact, I want to read just a few verses of that chapter. It says this: "Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus called Ananias, and to him the Lord said in a vision, 'Ananias,' and he said, 'Here am I, Lord.'" Well, the remainder of that story is he actually sends Ananias to speak to Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes Paul, and all of the problems that he thought was going to happen if he were to follow that calling. And I realized on that very night that was also my story, that I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fears about following the Lord and his call. But then I realized that I had to be more obedient, kind of like Ananias, and saying, "Here I am, Lord." And so life has been different ever since. I can remember that same weekend, my divisional commander was there, and I went up to him and said, I don't know what God is going to do with me, but I'm ready to go. And I can remember him saying to me, "Well, let's tie up your shoes, because it's going to be a race." And it really has been that kind of race. And I can honestly tell you, I never expected God to use me in the way that He's used me through all these years. And I've been surprised many times. What I thought God was doing, He was actually doing something totally different. But I needed to be obedient in that. In fact, really, that obedience led me to you in a place called Dallas, Texas.
All right.
So that's kind of been my story, and we've been officers together for like 35 plus years.
Right. Yeah. So, I didn't grow up in the Salvation Army. I grew up in first the Baptist church and then the Methodist church. And my mother died when I was really young, and my father remarried a lady who was a member of the Salvation Army Advisory Board. And so through her connections, I went to work at Camp Grandview when I was 17 years old. I didn't know anything about the Salvation Army. I just knew I was going to work at a Christian camp, and it was at that camp that I led the first little girl to Jesus. And I was so flabbergasted, because when we were talking about Jesus in the cabin and our devotion time, she said, "Who is that?" And she didn't know who Jesus was. And, you know, having grown up in the Bible Belt of South Mississippi, everybody I knew Jesus. And so I just knew at that point, that was such a turning point in my life, that I got to introduce somebody to Jesus, and I wanted to keep doing that. And so, you know, through several years of working at camp, and then I became a soldier of the Salvation Army, and went to Dallas to work for the music department there at Dallas Divisional Headquarters, and then I met you.
Right.
And yeah.
I invited her to.
That's the rest of the story.
That's the story. I invited her and said, "Let's go to Paris, Texas, that is, because that's where I was stationed at the time." And so we spent a little bit of time in Paris, and then of course we did some other things for the Salvation Army. Became officers that next year. Yeah,
and we've had all kinds of appointments. We've been corps officers. We've been training officers at the training college. Yeah, we were divisional youth leaders,
right,
and territorial youth leaders.
Two great divisions.
Yeah, and then we were on DHQ here in Kentucky, and also at Louisville Area Command as area commanders. And
actually, and then, our first time in Louisville was kind of what I would call a coffee stop. You know,
we just stopped for a cup of coffee.
We had a cup of coffee that year.
So but we've been able to do a lot of things in our officership, and we've found great joy in serving the Lord. So I just wonder what's been kind of like your favorite thing about being an officer. Your best thing.
Honestly, it's been the unexpected, but it's the ability to pour into people that I work with. I think the older I get, the more I realize that God has gifted me with the gift of leadership, and the ability to teach, not in the formal way, but really to teach from experience, to teach young people, young men in particular, you know, how to be good men, how to be good fathers, how to be good husbands, and how to be good leaders. And so it's been a real joy of mine to be able to kind of pour into young men along the way.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing that's always given me great joy is children and young people, and you know, so being divisional youth leaders probably, you know, was one of the highlights of our time. But even before that, you know, as corps officers, we always had a lot of kids from Paris, Texas to Portsmouth, Virginia, to Fort Myers, Florida. We had always had a lot of young people around us, and I can remember in our very first appointment, probably, you know, and I would say one of the joys has been being able to look back and see where God did something that you didn't even realize He was doing at the time, both in our hearts and in the hearts of young people. But in our first corps appointment, we had a young man there who could only come to church if he brought his younger brother and sister.
I do remember this story.
Was their caregiver, and because his mom had to work on Sundays, and so you know, I said, well, then just bring them with you. And they were little. I want to say his brother was maybe 2.
Yeah.
And maybe not even that old. But
what I remember is he cried all the time.
Yeah. and because I wouldn't let him go in the teen classes with his brother. He had to go to the nursery, and so at that corps, the nursery was upstairs. You had to go up this little tiny staircase, and I would carry him upstairs, and he would kick my legs the whole way. Yeah. You know, so mad and crying, and but he kept coming. You know, and at the time, I was just trying to make sure that teenage boy was in church, because I knew he really needed to be there. And you know, in order to do that, his little brother and sister had to come.
Right.
And I wasn't even focused on the little brother and sister, you know. And then last year at commissioning, that little brother was commissioned as a Salvation Army officer. and and was the flag bearer for his session.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought? I can remember you carrying that little boy up, and when we say little, he wasn't little. I mean, he was still a baby, but he was a big baby, and every Sunday, in order to allow that young man to come to the Corps, we took on this little baby in the nursery, and who would have known that, all these years later, what we thought God was doing was allowing us to minister to this young man, which we did, and still have a great relationship with him today. But God had even a bigger plan, something that we didn't even notice, didn't see. I mean, I'm pretty sure, going back to the story of Ananias, I'm pretty sure that Ananias had no idea what God was about to do in the life of Paul, and yet, because of his obedience, because he was faithful in the little things, and really all God was saying, I just want you to go and tell him that I've sent you there, and that that he is he has a great plan for his life. And I think that as we think about calling connections in the month of September, I think God is still calling men and women to unique kinds of ministry, and maybe they, like me, like you, we're not sure we understand totally what God is doing and why he's calling us to this kind of ministry, but he has a plan. I love that verse that says, I have a plan for you. It's a plan to bless you and not to harm you, a plan to prosper you and to give you a future, and I think that what the world needs today more than anything is to know that God is still working, and that he still has a plan for us in this great army.
Yeah, and I had what I thought were better plans for my life. I had different plans for my life and what I wanted to do, and but God had this in mind all along, and orchestrated through amazing ways to get me to the place where he would want me to be. And I think about the blessing that it's been to us personally, to our children, and the things that they were able to experience growing up in the Salvation Army, and just living in all the different places that we lived. But I'm just so thankful to God that he would even consider me worthy to do this, that that he would allow me to be a spokesperson for him, to represent him, and and to just be able to speak into the lives of other people. And I too believe that that God is still calling people to serve him. It may not look exactly like it did for us, but I believe he's calling people, and there's an urgency to it. There's an urgency that this world needs hope and needs reassurance that that God loves them, that there's something greater than just what they see in front of them, that there's a bigger purpose for your life. So this morning I would just say thank you for joining us, for listening in to a little bit of our story. And we pray that you would just, like Ananias, be willing to listen to what God is saying and be obedient to what he is calling you to do, even if it's scary, even if you can't see how that will work out. But I pray that you'll just be obedient to what God is calling you to do.
Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget, we want for you to subscribe to our channel. So make certain you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button if you like the content that you see. And if you feel led, leave us a comment. We want to hear from you. Also, we want to remind you that when it comes to your tithes and offering, make certain that you are being faithful to this act of worship. And we encourage you to use tithely if you're unable to meet. Blessings to you, my friends.
We would like to say thank you for joining us for our Coffee Time with Jesus. We look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless you and have a great week.